When it comes to Disney characters, we usually remember the heroes and villains that come with their stories, the main source of conflict that we either are for or against. But when we always see them, they also manage to bring along a bunch of sidekicks or funny friends along their journey that makes the world more entertaining. This includes the likes of Genie, Iago, Timon and Pumbaa, Baymax, Fix-It Felix, Flounder, Jumba and Pleakley, and of course, Olaf. Most of which, in their own unique ways, are comic reliefs to our main characters that support them in any way they could think of. But in speaking of Olaf specifically, comes an actual greater problem that I realized Disney uses more than they ever should. Because while he was introduced as a fun character in the first Frozen movie, he became much more than that by how many times we see him in their merchandise in the parks and all the ways that Joss Gad's face pops over Disney content that you find. It's just where I find that his uses in the stories that have come out of Disney at this point are just the wrong types of uses for such a character. I mean, all of what I just mentioned are normal and typical of Disney to do as a company, as what I just covered with my long video and them using Genie for their crap excuse of a system, but this one comes from a franchise they just seem so hell-bent on milking to its fullest potential by its baffling popularity the world seems so enamored with today. And so in this video, I just wanted to discuss the major problems with him as a character in the specific ways that Disney had used him in that regard that bugs me. Ones where I don't think he's a bad character the way he was shown originally that should annoy me. I mean, he does sometimes, but mainly because of the way he has been utilized in that regard. For starters, when Frozen was first being advertised in its teasers, it was just him and Sven, which was pretty fun and actually intrigued me. He was just the main target to show to kids at a time where I didn't even know it was going to be a princess movie as well, or even one based upon a Snow Queen for that matter, until the next trailers did come out at the time. And when the film actually did come out, we truly saw him for who we know him today. The dumb, bubbly sidekick of Anna and Elsa who they built when they were young and came alive because of her ice powers and ironically dreamt of summer. Everything about him was actually totally fine and fit the charm of the story and why it works the way it did. This didn't mean it needed him, but he was just a cool addition in his own way to bridge the important childhood bond between the two sisters that was also important to discover what true love was about in the end of the film. Where the original drafts of the story had a more mean to serve the villainous version of Elsa, to the point where co-director Jennifer Lee, who wasn't actually directing the project just yet, really wanted to kill him, finding him to be the hardest character to actually deal with. But of course, that was very clearly early on in the story before they even thought of getting Joss Gad to become a part of the role, trying to make sense of how he would work as a character in the film. Because like I just mentioned earlier, he really isn't that important to the overall plot if we think about it in terms of what Elsa and Anna actually go through in their journey and what Kristoff also does serving to help Anna in her journey as well. But in terms of having that character again, away from the obvious issue of making him marketable and merchandisable to the highest degree, he does make the story have more charm to it in its own way, especially putting down the importance of true love when he talks with Anna about others like Kristoff actually did to help them coming all this way and sacrificing for the greater good, which also helps encourage her to sacrifice herself for her sister and realize what true love actually brought in that very process between them. So in that way, it's very good and very important to actually tell. But also, of course, in terms of magical powers featured in the film, it also involves characters who have control over ice and snow, using Marshmallow in that sense of the mean bodyguard to show the type of how many degrees of power that Snow can actually show. And from there, with the rest of the movie, he just became the figurehead of the franchise itself other than Elsa at that point, of course. Where I know people do like Anna, and she is a big part taking center stage, but Olaf just takes the cake for who they actually wanted to show in that center stage. This is something we saw again when they released Frozen Fever as their first major short film and extension to the Frozen franchise before the Cinderella 2015 film, where he was just the same cute side character that people would love and nothing more than that because of the focus on the two sisters, doing whatever they can with the character when Frozen was at its peak popularity for Disney animation in that initial time period. But that of course was when the problems actually truly started, as I just said, with more content surrounding them in the parks, hearing his same voice over and over again during the holiday season, in the stories and whatever Disney could find to milk. Because you see, in 2017, Disney created a featurette called Olaf's Frozen Adventure that premiered alongside Coco for a limited time. The problem with this was the fact it premiered before Coco during that limited time. Because typically when it came to Pixar movies, you usually had the small short play that was by the same studio and not by Disney that acted as a sweet appetizer before the movie itself. But instead of making something short like they did previously in Frozen Fever, they made a 21-minute special TV episode that charted Olaf's journey for some reason to find holiday traditions for the sisters, making it about him helping to bring the magic back in their lives and adding more additions of new songs just because it's Frozen. And in doing so, Disney showed their hand of what they really cared about making this this time, when Frozen 2 was actually in development, trying to keep the franchise milked within our sights within any film they had released under their umbrella, including Pixar. And when you actually look about it, it just felt out of touch within another experience that we would get that would be much better because of the fact people came for that film and not this. Not a short adventure that has no substance or purpose beyond what it was designed to do marketing wise for a character like Olaf taking center stage. Because this isn't actually horrible or a bad short on its own, where it can be enjoyed for what it is with family, with the songs at home as a bonus content during the holidays and at Christmas, but it's not something you would want to watch an actual story with purpose to it. As we can tell by the title of this very short, the focus is to develop Olaf on his journey as he navigates the world, but it really just comes off in the wrong way that Disney does to pull one of their biggest sidekicks in the front and center protagonist stage in that very story alongside another full-length film with its own world and characters that deserve their own love as well. Because if we think about that too, Coco is a beloved film now, but its characters aren't as hugely promoted or popular as Olaf whenever the name of Disney is actually attached, where he would be next to that, and the reason why they made such a short about 21 minutes in length with him as that main focus. It was just a preview that added nothing, to be honest, in that regard, where the only feeling you have in this entire moment is the sheer annoyance at this pitiful snowman's existence, waiting to see if you got the right ticket to the film you actually bought in that moment. This is where you could see that my problems actually grow from being a main protagonist in some content against the will of how such a character worked regardless, doing some things that aren't necessary when another set of stories are trying to be played. I mean, other side characters like Timon and Pumbaa have their own show and their own content, but they serve their purpose well compared to, say, making an entire TV episode air before a movie. Just like, it makes sense because it's all separate and it didn't have to be pushed out like this. Because you think about it, The Lion King is also one of the highest grossing animated films of all time. They would have wanted to milk Timon and Pumbaa in that regard, right? But of course, it's a snowman, a lovable snowman that people love to make in wintertime, so why not actually do this version and actually prop him up to the absurd heights that we are doing right now. And that only grew again as we got closer to Frozen 2 and discovered that this film was also a huge mess for what it brought, including characters like Olaf, who still remained to be the main source of comic relief and existentialism for some reason. Like, sure, it's nice to see him this way, to come to grips with living like he could have done in a side short story with all of this content we got, but within the context of whatever the hell Frozen 2 was something that just didn't make any sense. Maybe it would when I'm much older than I am now, like Olaf actually said in the song too, but I just don't understand his point as a character in this film that didn't know what the hell it wanted to do for its entire story. I mean, he's not as annoying as most people would say, but it's just jacked up to a degree that makes no sense as a way to disguise the main problem of how they were going about to move the story in a very certain direction. His best moments do come in the form of storytelling and his interactions with the Nostalgia kids, as kids would want to do with him, but he just doesn't have much impact that changes the story in any meaningful way like he did in his own way within the first film. I mean, it's not a large degree and he doesn't have to do that, but you can actually see the effects he actually plays within our two main characters. All of which just points to the problem of the film having no real consequences whatsoever other than what was discussed at the very beginning, where this involves how Olaf was snapped out of existence because Elsa actually froze for some reason after sending the message to Anna to create some sort of stakes for her to find her purpose in the story and do the right thing. Something that supposedly builds up emotional moment in that particular frame, but becomes rendered useless when he's eventually revived at the end, like how Arendelle was saved by Elsa, who was the other spirit or element that they wanted to do that didn't make any sense at all. It just didn't work at all because anyone, including every child who saw this for that matter, already knew that Disney themselves wouldn't be so damn stupid to kill their most profitable character from this franchise, and just from the fact that Elsa only froze and didn't get killed, like that would have actually affected anything at all. A point that just makes no sense because Marshmallow and all the Snowgies at the very end lived to hear Olaf's recap of the movie during the end credits. Like, wouldn't they have experienced that as well before hearing his story? Why would they exist like right now when Elsa had to rebirth Olaf in this very ending? I mean, it's not an important fact, but then again, the movie just doesn't understand any of the rules that were set up or any of the consequences I just mentioned for that reason. Because what's the point of killing off a character that had no real purpose other than to spew nonsense every 10 seconds of the journey? Because I really can't think of a good reason it had to end up like this, where they all feel like separate characters from different movies, from the way Elsa and Anna actually care about the journey and Kristoff only cares about proposing, while Olaf tags along about them to talk about his existential 3-year-old crisis. It's nice to have such concepts introduced within him to actually discover more about the world, but it doesn't make sense for you to overbloat the character with such traits or qualities when it's better to actually show him this as he goes along his journey. Similar to the first movie when he has the charm of adding to the conversation in tense situations or other moments to make sense within those scenes of the world around him. Something that only got worse when they decided to release Once Upon a Snow cameraman in 2020 to the few minutes of the first Frozen movie of what Olaf did before he met Anna, his creation and his grips with existence that they like to put in. Honestly, this should have been the short release before Coco because it was the normal length of what they usually had before bloating it with random nonsense that doesn't even need to exist. Just like this short that has this blatant continuity errors within the story itself and the historical nature for when this takes place with the tech they have. Like yeah, when you look back on Frozen itself and whatever this was, it just doesn't make sense at all when Olaf says he always wanted a nose but actually had one in the short before that was removed when he wanted a carrot at the beginning. One that makes you think that they should have retconned the entire movie to the fact that it should have had he always wanted a carrot nose in that part because it makes no sense whatsoever that he wanted a nose specifically other than the fact that they wanted to make a short again to base around Olaf to fill in a gap that didn't need to exist. Just explaining things that didn't even need to be explained in the first place as a short reason using the simplest answers, like the way he learned about summer here rather than naturally feeling that emotion by existence itself and actually learning about the other stuff that's offered at this time in the store, being a being who only exists in winter climates. The only part that justifies this or any reason why Olaf knows who he truly is the ending, and that's it. The short 30 seconds before the short actually closes. Nothing else about it screams super important to know other than the content to have around a character that they can sell. Just something most kids can actually put on and nothing more. A waste of resources if you ask me. Like honestly, you didn't need to have that when you made small shorts of him retelling other Disney stories in such a program like Olaf Presents. Much more fun and charming and a good use of the character in my opinion for what they wanted rather than filling a segment that doesn't do anything but remind you of Frozen and only Frozen. Because to be honest, there is no point you should be watching this short unless you wanted to find time to waste 6 minutes out of your time. The point being here is that I just have a problem with how they use the character to such an annoying degree without the purpose he was designed for originally. I still do think he's a fine character on his own, and none of the material that he has been a part of right now are quite as horrendous as most might think. But just think the way they have utilized such stories in between the others that they have are just so ill-intentioned for what they could do for him. With the avenues they have provided for other characters by TV shows and other content, it just seems more baffling that this is the direction they wanted to take, where they could have done the easier, more efficient route of having newer stories be told, but just decided that it'd be much more better to keep it on the public's main view as much as possible. For Olaf will always remain to be a character that exists for the sake of their own enjoyment to fulfill their pockets rather than our enjoyment for storytelling possibilities. I'm all done now, so goodbye.